What's going on, guys? My name is Matt, and about a week ago I found some GPU mystery boxes on Amazon. They range from about $40 all the way up to $150. They're all horribly reviewed, but I couldn't help myself and bought 10 of them, spending over $450. Only 8 showed up, the last 2 just never arrived, and in my most recent video I unboxed them to see what I got. I would recommend watching that video before watching this one, but long story short is they sent me a bunch of ancient cards covered in dust and rust. After opening them up, I was pretty disappointed and kind of thought that would be the end of things, but many of you seemed interested in a part 2, so in today's video I'm going to be plugging these cards in, seeing if they even turn on and what the system reports them as, then I'll try to game on a few of them, and finally I want to see if I'm able to return them. So the first thing I wanted to do was plug these in and see if they even work. I knew a lot of these may not even be able to boot into Windows 10 because they're so old, so to speed things up I installed them alongside a modern GPU which would act as our display out, and then I could check in Device Manager to see if these cards will even be recognized. Starting with card number 1, I plugged it in and booted into Windows. Device Manager was showing a second video output but was showing it as a basic Windows display device. Even though this wasn't very helpful info wise, I was able to use a program called GPU-Z to see what this card actually is. Going into GPU-Z, it stated this card is an NVIDIA G100. This is a card that just had its 13th birthday a few days ago, and it was released on March 10th of 2009. It has 256 megabytes of DDR2 graphics memory and uses a PCIe 2.0 interface. Plugging in card number 2, I found that even though it had the same cooler and a similar look to the last card, it actually was an ATI HD 2400 Pro. The 2400 Pro is almost 15 years old at this point and does have the same 256 megabytes of video memory as the last card, but overall is even worse spec-wise. Card number 3 turned out to be an NVIDIA 7100GS, which is again somehow even worse than the last 2 cards, and later this year it will turn 16. This card only has 128 megabytes of video memory and only supports up to DirectX 9. If the other 2 cards were bad, then this one is just awful. Cards 4 and 5, when plugged in, showed up as being NVIDIA G100s like card number 1. I would have liked to see something different, but at least these weren't as bad as cards number 2 and 3. Card 6 was another 128 megabyte NVIDIA 7100GS. This card again is just ancient. GPU 7 was another NVIDIA G100, but this one actually has an HDMI port. Keep in mind everything else either used VGA, S-Video, a combination of the two, and sometimes they would have DVI. This is the only card with a modern display standard like HDMI. And finally, GPU number 8 was actually slightly different. It was the NVIDIA 7300LE. This card is miraculously somehow even worse than all the other cards from this mystery box, and in a few days will be turning 16 years old. I'd be willing to bet there are people watching this right now who are actually younger than this GPU. Now at this point it's kind of obvious how these cards might perform in gaming, but because I was very curious, I did decide to try and game on at least one of these cards. The NVIDIA G100 was the most common card pulled and seemed to have the best chance of not exploding while trying to game, so I dusted off this one, which is GPU 7 and is the one with an HDMI port, meaning I can actually capture gameplay from it with relative ease. That is assuming I could get any games to run. So before going into testing some games, I needed to see if this thing would even boot into Windows. Plugging it into the top PCIe slot and powering the system on, I was happy to see it booted right up. The resolution was off for a bit, but after scouring the internet for drivers, I found the latest version to be from 2015, which is kind of hilariously old at this point. After installing the drivers, this card did seem to work in Windows perfectly fine at 1080p, so with the card installed and working, it was time to start testing, or at least trying to test some games. The system I'm testing with is a modern Ryzen 5 5600G based system with 16GB of RAM and an NVMe SSD, meaning the main bottleneck in this system should end up being the GPU. One problem with trying to game on this card is the fact it doesn't have the ability to utilize many of the modern APIs required for PC gaming. I first started by trying to open Fortnite. Doing this resulted in a pop-up telling me my system was unfortunately not compatible. With Fortnite not even running at all, I was going to close out of Epic Games, but decided to try and open up Borderlands 3 for the heck of it. To my surprise, it actually opened up, but even just the menu was a slideshow. Here's the footage sped up 10x. I was just trying to adjust the video settings to make them lower, but after 10 minutes of slowly and painfully trying to navigate the menus, I gave up, as it was obvious that if this card was struggling to render the Borderlands 3 menus, then it running the game itself was going to be impossible. Next, I tried to play CSGO, but it wouldn't open. Valorant did an update and made me restart, which gave me hope, but in the end wouldn't open and gave me a pop-up saying my system didn't meet the minimum requirements. Genshin Impact didn't open. Overwatch wouldn't open, Rainbow Six Siege wouldn't open, but luckily the last 2 games I tested actually did open. To my surprise, GTA 5 started right up. The fact GTA 5 even opened up was a miracle, and luckily it recognized this GPU was a piece of junk and defaulted me to the lowest settings and resolution that GTA 5 supports. This is a resolution of 800 by 600 and every single setting put to the lowest option possible. With the settings configured, I hit to enter into the story mode, and boy oh boy, the game didn't crash, but the performance was just horrendous. I just loaded up the first driving mission with Franklin, and it was like watching a slideshow. The average FPS was around 8 or 9, and the 1% lows were so low and so arbitrarily close to 0 that MSI Afterburner just listed them as 0, which I think is kind of hilarious. Now, even with the game running at a buttery smooth 8 FPS, I was still able to complete the first portion of the mission, and as you can see, I delivered the car in absolutely perfect condition with no damage at all. Now, I could have finished out the mission, but even the first part gave me a massive headache, and the thought of playing any more GTA 5 at 8 FPS sounded about as fun as doing my taxes. So with the GTA 5 Slideshow Edition tested, I went for a game I was almost certain this little card was gonna run, which is Minecraft. At the default settings of 1080p, I was getting under 20 FPS, so I switched things to 720p with much reduced draw distance and found the average to be around 60 and never really seemed to drop below 30 even when blowing up a bunch of TNT. Now obviously a lot of this comes down to the fact this is being paired with a modern mid-range CPU, but still shows that Minecraft can run on basically anything. All in all, I was surprised at how little games would even open up on this card. I was sure stuff like CSGO and Fortnite would at least open up, but in the end they didn't. So now let's talk about returning these cards. While the listings did state there weren't any returns allowed, Amazon's return guarantee was still listed under the purchase section. Not only this, but the item is listed as new, and these cards were clearly anything but new. Now, to give the seller a little bit of credit, these did all technically turn on and were recognized by Windows, so they were in working condition, but selling items with broken mounting hardware, tons of rust, and not even taking the time to dust them off is pretty bad in my opinion. So what I did was document photos of the rust, damage, and cleanliness of the cards and submitted a return claim to Amazon. Luckily, Amazon without any hesitation offered me a refund, and because it was being returned because of a problem, they gave me the option to just leave the items at my front door and they'll pick them up for free. I very much understand the argument of trying to avoid shopping at Amazon because of their shady business practices, but their ease of returns in my anecdotal experience has been a big reason why I continue to shop on their website. I'm currently trying to figure out if it's worth it to report these listings and if these are breaking any of Amazon's terms of service. Like I said in the last video, people are buying these cards and getting ripped off, which is something I would like to put a stop to if I can. So if there are any Amazon TOS experts watching this, then make sure to let me know in the comments below. So with those returned, I think I'm done with these GPU mystery boxes. If you find other PC hardware related boxes online that you think I should check out, then let me know. So conclusion time, should you buy one of these mystery boxes? Absolutely not. Definitely avoid them and discourage anyone you know from purchasing one. You can actually get a card for the $50 to $150 these boxes go for that will wipe the floor with all of these cards. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.